Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I have fibromyalgia since I was 19. It's one of those conditions that people don't really understand because you can't see it. On the outside, I look like any other 25-year-old woman, but inside my muscles ache constantly. And some days the pain is so bad, I can barely walk across a room. After years of struggling through grocery store trips and forcing myself to walk long distances just to avoid judgment, my doctor convinced me to apply for a disabled parking permit. It took me months to work up the courage to actually use it. The day this all happened, I was having a rough pain flare. My lower back felt like someone was driving nails into it, and my legs were that special kind of tired that comes with chronic illness. I've been putting off going to the park for weeks because I knew the walk from the regular parking area to the playground would be too much. My nephew was visiting and I promised to take him to feed the ducks. I couldn't disappoint him again, so I made the decision to use my disabled parking permit for the first time. My hands were shaking when I hung it from my rearview mirror. I kept telling myself I had every right to be there, but the anxiety was overwhelming. What if someone questioned me? What if they thought I was faking? I pulled into the disabled parking space closest to the park entrance. When I turned off the engine, I noticed a middle-aged woman in a bright pink jogging outfit standing near the walking path. She was staring directly at my car with a disapproving expression. I tried to ignore her and focused on gathering my things, but I could feel her eyes boring into me. The moment I stepped out of my car, she was already walking over. Her face was set in a self-righteous scowl that immediately put me on edge. She confronted me in a condescending tone, pointing out that I was parked in a spot reserved for disabled people. Her voice dripped with disapproval when she spoke to me like I was a child who had done something wrong. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I told her that I was aware of where I was parked and that I had a permit. I pointed to the blue disabled parking permit hanging clearly from my rearview mirror. She barely looked at it before scoffing at me. She told me that I looked fine to her and said that these spots were for people who really needed them. Her tone made it clear she thought I was lying about need in the space. My heart started racing. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. I could feel my face getting hot, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I explained to her that not all disabilities are visible and that I had every right to park there. That seemed to make her even angrier. Her whole demeanor shifted from condescending to downright hostile. She stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. She told me that young people always think they can get away with anything and threatened to teach me a lesson. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. I instinctively took a step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. I tried to tell her there was no need for hostility and that I wasn't doing anything wrong, but she wasn't listening anymore. I could see her hands clenching into fists. Then, without warning, she lunged toward me with her hand raised like she was about to hit me. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over my own feet. Just when I thought things were about to get really bad, a voice cut through the tension. A park ranger had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He was a tall, older man with graying hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from years of dealing with difficult people. I'd never been so happy to see a uniform in my life. The ranger told her to step back and explained that I had every right to park there. His voice was calm but carried clear authority. Karen whirled around to face him, her anger now redirected. She demanded to know who he was, to tell her what to do, and accused me of faking my disability. She claimed she was doing a public service by exposing me. The ranger didn't even blink. He just stood there with his arms crossed, completely unfazed by her outburst. He identified himself as an authority at the park and again asked her to step back. He warned her that if she didn't comply, he would have to call the police. Any reasonable person would have backed down at that point. But Karen wasn't reasonable. She actually stamped her foot like a toddler having a tantrum. She told him to go ahead and call the police because they would see that she was right. The ranger didn't hesitate. He pulled out his radio and called for police backup. While we waited, Karen kept ranting about how I was a fraud and how she was just trying to protect the rights of real disabled people. The irony was completely lost on her. When the police arrived about 5 minutes later, Karen immediately launched into her story. She was gesticulating wildly and pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. She told the officers that I was illegally parked in a disabled spot and said that I was clearly not disabled and taking a space away from someone who actually needed it. One of the officers, a woman who looked like she'd dealt with this type of situation before, walked over to examine my permit. She checked the number against my license and nodded to her partner. She told Karen that my permit was valid and current and that I had every right to park there. Then she turned to Karen and her expression grew stern. She told Karen that she was causing a disturbance and had tried to assault me, and that they were going to have to detain her. She protested that they couldn't do this to her and claimed she was just trying to do the right thing. But the officers weren't interested in her protests. They cuffed her hands behind her back and started walking her toward their patrol car. Karen kept trying to argue, saying that this was ridiculous and that she was a tax-paying citizen who volunteered at the animal shelter. She claimed they were arresting the wrong person. The second officer started reading her rights, while his partner loaded her into the back of the police car. I just stood there watching the whole thing unfold, still shaking from the adrenaline. Part of me felt bad for her, but mostly I felt relieved that someone had stood up for me. After they drove away with Karen, the park ranger came over to check on me. He looked concerned and asked if I was okay. He apologized for what I had to deal with and explained that some people just don't understand that disabilities come in many forms. I told him it wasn't his fault and thanked him for stepping in when he did. I said that I didn't know what would have happened if he hadn't been there. He told me that people need to understand that not all disabilities are visible and complimented me on how well I had handled myself. He added that I shouldn't have had to handle it at all. He stayed with me for a few more minutes to make sure I was really okay, then went back to his patrol. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the park with my nephew, feeding the ducks and trying to put the whole incident behind me. I started working in kitchens when I was 16 as a dishwasher at a small family restaurant. By the time I was 21, I had worked my way up to become a third-year apprentice chef at a trendy cafe called Sugar. That's how I found myself applying for a position at Blackstone Bistro, one of the most respected restaurants in the city. When they called me for an interview, they gave me specific instructions that made my stomach flutter with nerves. The manager told me I needed to come in wearing my chef uniform because this wasn't just an interview, it was also a practical test where they would ask me to prepare a dish to show my skills. I spent the night before practicing my knife skills and reviewing classic techniques. I ironed my chef jacket from Sugar extra carefully, making sure the bright pink Sugar logo was crisp and clean. The jacket was eye-catching with its hot pink buttons and matching pink and white checkered pants. It definitely stood out, but it was the only proper chef uniform I owned. The interview went better than I expected. I prepared a perfect pan-seared salmon with herb butter, and the head chef seemed impressed. He was a tall, serious man who wore the traditional all-white chef's coat that marked him as the kitchen's leader. The head chef told me they would review all the candidates and give me a call within the week. He thanked me for coming in and seemed genuinely pleased with my performance. I felt good about my chances when I walked back into the dining area. My stomach was growling loudly. I had been too nervous to eat breakfast, and now it was well past lunchtime. Since I was already there and still had 30 minutes left on my break from Sugar, I decided to grab a quick bite. The hostess seated me at a small table near the window. The lunch crowd was winding down, leaving mostly empty tables scattered throughout the dining room. I ordered the fish and chips and pulled out my phone to kill time while waiting. That's when I noticed a table of 4 women across the room. They kept looking in my direction and whispering to each other. I figured they were probably just curious about my colorful uniform. It did stick out like a sore thumb in this upscale establishment where all the staff wore sleek black uniforms. My food arrived quickly and I dug in with enthusiasm. I was starving and the fish was perfectly crispy. I was eating fast, knowing I needed to get back to Sugar soon for the dinner prep shift. I was about halfway through my meal when I sensed someone standing next to my table. I looked up to see a middle-aged woman holding a plate of food. She had short blonde hair and was wearing an expensive-looking blazer. I greeted her politely and went back to eating, assuming she was just passing by on her way to the restroom or something, but she didn't move. She just stood there, holding her plate and staring at me with an increasingly annoyed expression. Finally, she cleared her throat loudly to get my attention again. When I looked up, she looked absolutely furious. She asked me if I thought her steak looked well done, thrusting the plate toward me. I looked at it and could see immediately that it was cooked to medium well at most. The center still had a slight pink tinge. I told her it looked medium well and asked what her point was. I honestly didn't understand why she was showing me her food. I just wanted to finish eating and get back to work. That's when she completely lost it. She slammed the plate down on my table so hard that food went flying everywhere. Pieces of steak and vegetables scattered across the surface, barely missing my own plate. She snapped at me, saying that instead of sitting there enjoying my food, maybe I should get back in the kitchen and cook the way paying customers ask for. I stared at her in complete shock. I asked her why she thought I worked there and explained that I didn't. I told her I was just having lunch and would be leaving soon, suggesting she ask someone who actually worked there for help. But she wasn't having any of it. She refused to accept my explanation and insisted that since I was wearing a chef uniform, I needed to get back in the kitchen right now and cook her food the way she had asked and paid for. I rolled my eyes and tried to stay calm. I explained more clearly that I had been there for a job interview and they had told me to wear my uniform. I made it clear that I hadn't cooked her steak and didn't work there. I told her to go talk to someone at the front desk because they could actually help her since I absolutely did not work there. I was getting louder now, but I figured anyone with eyes could see the obvious differences between my uniform and the restaurant's staff uniforms. My jacket clearly said sugar in bright pink letters, had hot pink buttons, and my pants were pink and white checkered. Every single employee at Blackstone Bistro wore black jackets with either white or black buttons and gray micro-checkered pants. The head chef wore all white. We looked nothing alike, but somehow this woman was still not getting it. She told me not to dare raise my voice at her, claiming she was a paying customer who demanded proper service. She insisted I would fix her order right now. The commotion was starting to draw attention from other diners. I could see people turning in their seats to watch the drama unfold. That's when I spotted the head chef walking over from the kitchen, probably wondering what all the noise was about. The head chef approached and asked what the problem was. The woman immediately turned her fury on him, complaining that the young staff member was refusing to recook her steak and calling it absolutely unacceptable customer service. The head chef looked at me and I could see a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had just interviewed me an hour ago and knew exactly who I was. He suggested that maybe it was because I didn't work there, then offered to take her plate and hear what was wrong with it so he could get everything sorted out for her. The woman's jaw dropped. She looked back and forth between me and the head chef like she couldn't process what she was hearing. She asked if I really didn't work there. I smiled at her confusion and reminded her that I had told her 3 times already that I didn't work there. I took the last bite of my fish, grabbed my bag, and stood up to leave. The woman just stood there, stunned into silence for the first time since she'd approached my table. When I walked toward the exit, I could hear the head chef patiently explaining to her that he would personally ensure her steak was recooked to her specifications. His professionalism in handling the situation just reinforced my desire to work at this establishment. 2 days later, I got the call. I had gotten the job at Blackstone Bistro. When I started the following week, I learned some interesting gossip from my new co-workers. Apparently, the woman who had confronted me was something of a regular customer. She came in at least twice a week and always found something wrong with her food. The staff had nicknamed her Karen the Complainer because she sent back nearly every dish she ordered, but she kept coming back anyway. My first week on the job, I was working the lunch shift when I spotted a familiar face being seated at table 12. It was her, the same woman who had yelled at me for not working there. This time, I actually was working there. I watched from the kitchen when she studied the menu, probably planning her next complaint. When her order came back to the kitchen, I wasn't surprised to see it was the same thing she'd ordered during our first encounter, a well-done steak. This time I made sure it was cooked exactly to her specifications. Actually, I cooked it a little beyond well done just to be safe. When the server brought it out, I peeked through the kitchen window to watch her reaction. She cut into the steak, examined it carefully, and for once in her life she seemed satisfied. But then, true to form, she called the server over. She complained that the vegetable medley was overcooked and that she had specifically asked for crisp vegetables. Some people never change. I started my job at Woodforest National Bank right after college when I couldn't find anything in my field. The bank was hiring and offered decent benefits, so I figured I'd work there temporarily while looking for something better. 3 years later, I'm still here. The work itself isn't too bad, mostly helping people with account issues, processing transactions, and handling various banking services. My manager is pretty reasonable, and most customers are fine to deal with. But then there are the entitled ones. We have a few regular customers like this, and let me tell you about one particular incident that happened about a month ago. So there's this woman who comes in regularly. She's what we call a difficult customer. Always demanding, never satisfied, constantly complaining about something. She thinks she knows better than us about everything, from bank policies to how our machines work. My coworkers and I have learned to brace ourselves whenever we see her walking through the door. On this day, she came into the bank with her usual attitude. She'd lost her debit card and needed a replacement. This is pretty routine for us. We can issue new debit cards the same day as long as customers pay the fee. It's $10 for a reprint of the same card number, or $15 for a completely new card with new numbers. Some account types get these fees waived, but hers wasn't one of them. Since she just wanted to replace a lost card with the same numbers, I processed it as a reprint. Simple enough. I printed the card, activated it, and sent her on her way. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. About 10 minutes later, she came walking back into the bank. She had this angry look on her face. She walked straight up to my window and slammed the card down. She demanded that I print the card again. When I asked if it wasn't working, she told me to look at the last 2 numbers and complained that other banks don't give her cards with rubbed off numbers. I looked at the card. Sure enough, the last 2 digits were slightly faded. This happens sometimes with our card printer. When it activates the chip, it can cause some minor rubbing on the numbers. It's pretty common and doesn't affect the card's functionality at all. I apologized and explained that sometimes this happens with the machine because it rubs part of the numbers off when activating the chip. She said she didn't care and that it looked terrible. She demanded I do it again. I tried to explain that I didn't think this was a good idea and that we really don't have control over how the machine works. But she raised her voice and said she didn't care what I had to do. She just wanted me to print her card again so it would look nice. She was raising her voice now, and other customers were starting to stare. But then she did something that really caught me off guard. She reached into her purse, pulled out a pair of scissors, and started cutting up the card right there in front of me. She cut it into tiny little pieces, making sure I watched every snip. After destroying the card, she told me to print it now or she would have to close her account and contact the market manager. Now she dropped the market manager's name like she knew him personally. But here's the thing. Unless you've actually had conversations with him before, you wouldn't know his name. It was obvious she was just trying to name drop to intimidate me into complying with her demands. I looked over at my manager, who had been watching this whole scene unfold. He gave me a little nod, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. Time for some malicious compliance. I put on my most helpful smile and told her absolutely, but to ensure this wouldn't happen again, we would need to change the numbers. So I would need her to sign some things. She asked sarcastically if that was so hard. Oh, if only she knew what she was getting herself into. So I started printing new cards. Each time the machine would rub off some numbers, which, as I mentioned, is pretty common. She would examine the card like she was inspecting a diamond. If it wasn't perfect, she'd cut it up and demand another one. I kept apologizing about the situation and saying, let's try again. And I'd print another card, then another, then another. She would look at each card, find some tiny imperfection, cut it up, and tell me to do it again. This went on for about 10 minutes. 8 cards later, we finally got one where the numbers weren't rubbed off at all. She finally said the card looked good and thanked me. She walked out with this smug grin on her face, thinking she'd won. She left us standing there with a massive pile of cut-up debit card pieces scattered across my desk. But here's what we forgot to mention to her. Getting a completely new card generated outside of fraud cases or natural expiration costs $15 each time. This is clearly explained during account opening, and since she had signed authorization forms for each new card, there was nothing she could say about it later. Normally, I try to help customers avoid unnecessary bank fees. I'll warn them about charges or suggest ways to minimize costs. But in this case, she had it coming. A couple of days later, she came walking back into the bank. And I mean walking, she looked absolutely furious. She angrily asked what I had done to her account. I apologized and asked what seemed to be the problem. She yelled that there were a bunch of debit card fees on her account and demanded to know what I had done. I explained that every time she had me print a new debit card for her, the other day a $15 fee was charged to her account. The first one, where she only had me reprint the same card number, was only $10. She screamed that I needed to reverse these fees right now before she called the market manager and got me fired. At this point, my manager stepped in. He'd been watching from his office and decided it was time to intervene. My manager greeted her and asked what the issue was. She yelled that my manager's employee had tricked her into paying over $100 worth of fees because I kept messing up her debit card. My manager asked her to please not yell. He also said that he was there when she demanded we print her a new debit card because she didn't like the numbers being rubbed off. We had her signature on forms saying that she wanted these cards to be printed. He said he would not be reversing these fees for her. She then said she wanted to close her account. My manager said, okay, but first, she needed to pay off her negative account balance as well as her line of credit. She hadn't expected that. Apparently, she owed the bank money and couldn't just walk away. She demanded the market manager's number immediately. I told her we weren't at liberty to just give out his number like that. I offered her the customer service number instead. This was absolutely true. The market manager had told us never to give out his direct number to customers who asked for it. The only people who needed his number already had it. She grabbed the customer service number and screamed that she would have our jobs for this. Then she flipped us off, kicked over a chair, and walked out of the bank. Later that day, we got a call from customer service about the incident. We explained everything that happened and scanned over all the signed debit card applications as proof. The customer service representative was actually pretty amused by the whole thing. So let's do the math. She had us print 8 brand new cards at $15 each, plus the original reprint at $10. That's $130 in fees, all because she demanded perfect-looking cards. My manager told me later that he probably would have just waived the original $10 reprint fee if she had simply been polite and asked nicely. Instead, her entitled attitude cost her an extra $120. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.